Welcome in, Grinders and Vegas Insiders. Holden Kushner here with Dan Bach from RotoGrinders. Of course, Kevin Rogers from Vegas Insider. We're just going to do the 3 Thanksgiving Day games because it's the third greatest day in the sports year. You got the first 2 days of the NCAA tournament. You got Thanksgiving. You got the 3 Fs, family, food, football. It's going to be amazing. Good afternoon, good morning, and if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you better like and subscribe to the channel or horrible things will happen to you. K-Raj, what's going on, buddy? 3 games, short turnaround. Love the Thanksgiving Day slate. Give me a little rundown here. Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, Dallas, New Orleans, at Atlanta. We'll really dive into these games in a moment, but it's not a bad slate.
It's not bad. I mean, good morning, Holden. Good morning, Dan.
Yeah.
It's just about, it always goes back to that argument about why do we get stuck with the Lions every year on Thanksgiving? It's tradition, I mean, you got to have the Lions on there. Yeah. But they've been a complete dumpster fire recently. And, you have 3 games, which obviously all 3 have different themes in a sense, that Chicago, Detroit. Chicago's trying to make a desperation run to the playoffs. And the second game with Buffalo and Dallas, we'll see if the Bills are for real or not, because they have a tough stretch coming up after this great start. And then the final game with New Orleans and Atlanta, that if the Saints can get some revenge against the Falcons for that ugly loss a few weeks ago. But at least the good news is a few years ago they put in a 3rd game at night. So at least you get football from 12:30 all the way through the night. So that's a positive.
Yeah, just so you know, there was a tradition in Salem, Massachusetts, burning witches. And you know what they did? They stopped it. So let's just get rid of the Lions on Thanksgiving. Dan Bach from RotoGrinders, Sharp Side app. What's going on, buddy? We got some DFS. This really, to me, is my favorite DFS day of the year. It's a short slate, but it's still 3 games. And you're going to be sitting your ass on the couch watching every single second.
Yeah, totally agree. Like, I don't love the single game slates all that much. Not my cup of tea, but 3 games is perfect. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be weird not rostering Theo Riddick for like the first time over the last 6 years, because he's always been like the key guy on this Thanksgiving slate, but he's nowhere to be seen. So we got to find this year's Theo Riddick. But this is a great day for DFS. Some big tournaments out there as well. Uh-huh. And it's fun too. Like, especially like if you're out with the family, put together like a family game. Like, you can do private contests where you're just playing, everybody who's at dinner builds a team or something like that. And that's fun. Get a little friendly competition. Don't have to jump in the big stuff, but either way, get some DFS in your life this Thanksgiving.
Are you ripping your grandma off at Thanksgiving?
Hey,
this is horrible, Dan.
I mean, what? I'm not. It's just an idea. Like, she's cheap anyway, right? So
playing in a dollar game with 5 other people. All right, so let's get into this, K-Rod, from the betting side of things. It's Chicago at Detroit. I am a little concerned that David Blau is going to have to start at quarterback for Detroit. Stafford's gone. Driscoll now has a hamstring injury, and he's all about the running. The Bears opened as 1.5 dogs, and now they're 3-point favorites. So explain to me why there was such a big line movement as it's Chicago at Detroit, 12:30 Eastern.
Because Detroit stinks.
But why would they open as favorites then?
That, though, I think that came about probably a week before. Here's what the Westgate Superbook in Las Vegas does. They release these early lines about 10 days before, and we saw that last week, too, that New Orleans was laying 7 to Carolina when they first released those early lines. Then it ended up being 9.5, 10 on that Monday. Same thing here, that I don't think it's necessarily a 4-point swing from a few days ago, that the opening line, they had Detroit a little more as a favorite, considering Chicago had been so poor, or at least Chicago wasn't playing well. But now, like you mentioned, with the quarterback situation and with the Lions losing that game to the Redskins last week, definitely has taken a bit of a hit on the Lions, even though they're back at home. And now Chicago coming off a win over the Giants. I think we see Chicago is still not going to be in the playoffs. That Minnesota and Seattle will be the 2 wild cards, assuming they don't win their divisions. And then Green Bay, San Francisco would be the other ones. But Chicago doesn't have a shot to make the playoffs unless they go on an incredible run and one of those teams melts down. So for the Bears, Holden, that this game, obviously now they have a little bit of momentum. They've won 2 of 3. They're playing great defensively. You can't take that away. It's just offensively, they're not very good. But defensively, going back, they allowed 14 to the Giants, 17 to the Rams, 13 to Detroit, 22 to the Eagles, 17 to the Chargers after they had kind of a substandard performance against New Orleans back in October. But Chicago, we know their defense is still very good. It's just a question of if their offense can step up. For Detroit, 6 consecutive non-covers for them. And the last time they won a game at home and covered a game at home was
1845.
Close. Week 2 against the Chargers.
Wow.
That's and the Chargers we see aren't very good either. And the last time they covered a game was against the Packers in that Monday night debacle. Remember that one? That was when they should have won at Green Bay, and they ended up losing by a point. So Detroit's just such a mess right now. I don't love the game just because I don't want to trust the Bears here, but it's very hard to make an argument for the Lions.
Hey, Dan, I think you look at the other 2 games in the slate and DFS side, those are the games. I mean, New Orleans and Atlanta is going to be popular, and we're talking tournaments here. And then, of course, Dallas, a lot of people are going to be on Dallas. So maybe this is the way to go if you want to win a tournament and just hope that you can pick the right guys. Hold your breath here, but Mitch Trubisky, I can't imagine he's going to be popular at all, especially considering that Prescott's just $400 more on DraftKings. But are there a couple of guys you could pick out from this game? Maybe you're going to differentiate yourself, whether it be a mid-tier wide receiver with the Bears, or all of a sudden you think that Montgomery's going to show up, Tariq Cohen, and anybody on the Lions side, maybe a Bo Scarborough.
Yeah, I think the Lions side is really the toughest place to go here today. I mean, the one guy you could look at, Kenny Golladay, his price is the lowest that it's been all season long. So you've got some value there. Yeah, Scarborough, last week 18 for 98 was respectable, but only a 50% snap share. So it's not like he's in there the entire time. And if David Blau is the quarterback, I really want no piece of Detroit at all. Now, Chicago, on the other hand, I do think there's a lot of ways we can go here because I think the key, obviously, you're going to want people from New Orleans, Atlanta, the highest total. You got the best offensive players. The Dallas players are pretty cheap. You can look at Cooper. We'll get to that game here in a moment. But you got to always find 1 or maybe 2 guys who can just get that one touchdown at really low ownership because there's always going to be a lot of lineup overlap just simply because we've got 3 games. So a couple of names to throw out here on the Chicago side. I don't think he's contrarian, but Tariq Cohen against Detroit, who gives it up in the pass game. 9 targets last game, 22% touch share for the Bears. So he won't be, 2% owned, but I think he's interesting. But 2 names that I do really like in this game, because I don't think we're going to see Taylor Gabriel play. One, Anthony Miller, 11 and 9 targets for him over the last 2 games. And this one's going to be a deep, deep sleeper. But Mr. Wims there for the Chicago Bears. He played 45% of the snaps last week. He's only $3K. And if we're without Taylor Gabriel, he's a guy who's going to get more snap shares than he had previously. So, again, you need to take a few shots along the way, and if he scores a touchdown, you're going to be way ahead of the field because nobody's going to play him. So, Wims, I think he's a 3K crapper that you can keep in your player pool.
I mean, the Miller call is good. I wonder how much ownership he's going to have because we all know that he's going to have a massive opportunity with 20 targets over the last 2 weeks. Hey, K-Raj, game total here, opened at 41, sitting at 39. Everybody knows this game is going to be ugly. So do you have a lean either way here?
I'd lean more towards under just because Detroit's offense can't produce and Chicago's offense stinks. The only thing I'll give the Lions here, the only one silver lining is I know Washington's offense is terrible. They did allow 4 field goals and a kickoff return for a touchdown. So let's not make it out to be that the Lions were diced up by the Redskins last week necessarily. They just couldn't get their offense going. So that's the one silver lining for Detroit. And the first time around, the Lions had some opportunities. They kicked a few field goals, and Chicago opened it up in the third quarter when they played a few weeks ago at Soldier Field. But I'm not going to depend on Jeff Driscoll if he plays. I'm not going to depend on Mitchell Trubisky for points. So I probably lean under. Just because, this is a Bears team that's hit 5 straight unders. I can't beg for points in this one.
Hey, Dan, we were kind of talking about Blau out there, and if it is Driscoll then, and he does have a hamstring. Does that change your opinion anything on the Lions passing game?
Not really, because they haven't really been that good with Driscoll in that position. Galladay in particular is the guy that I would want to play. I think he's the most talented player they have, but he is not, clicked particularly well there with Driscoll since he's been the starter. Maybe Blau is, maybe that'll change. Maybe that'll actually help Galladay a little bit. I would think so, but you never know. I just know that he and Driscoll have not put up very interesting fantasy numbers the last couple of weeks. So, and then, of course, like team defense, I think you can play both of these team defenses. Mm-hmm. They'll probably be fairly chalky here with a lower total, but, that's probably the chalk play in this game.
Yeah, I think Dallas will probably be popular too. Let's get into that game, 4:30 Eastern. So you'll sit on the couch about 45 minutes. Maybe you take a nap. Then the 4:30 game starts. Buffalo at Dallas. And Kevin, this game kind of stayed, the lines have stayed pretty even. It opened at 45. It's sitting at 45. Opened as 7-point favorites for Dallas at home. You can get them 7-point favorites at even money. You can get 6.5 at minus $1.10. Buffalo, we know this, that they have struggled against the good teams and they've beaten the bad teams so far. Dallas coming off that tough loss and New England with the bad weather. I mean, Amari Cooper was blaming the weather for him not getting any targets in that game. He's great at home. This Dallas offense is a completely different beast at home with Amari Cooper getting going here. Give me your thoughts first on the line, then we'll get to Dan and come back about the total.
Isn't it interesting how we look at Buffalo, and this is a totally fair argument, Holden, that Buffalo has beefed up against not great teams. But can you say the same thing about the Dallas Cowboys? When you look at, they've beaten the Giants twice, the Redskins, the Dolphins. They had a nice win over the Eagles. Even Philadelphia looks a bit suspect now. But Dallas really has done the same thing, and they have the worst record of any division leader right now. So for Dallas, you say to yourself, all right, you hung around with New England last week, but at the same time, you didn't win the shootout with them. And Dallas now falls to 0-5 when they scored less than 30 points. When they score 31 or more, they're 6-0. So Buffalo, who's very good defensively, that can the Bills now take this over to Dallas as a nice size underdog? And Buffalo is 3-1 on the road this year. The only loss came by 3 at Cleveland, a game that went back and forth. So they had an opportunity to be 4-0, and understandably, the best team they've beaten on the road now, it turns out, because they've improved so much, is Tennessee. And that was still with Marcus Mariota at quarterback. But this Buffalo team, still very good on the defensive side. As long as Josh Allen doesn't make mistakes, I think they have a good shot to cover, if not win. I mean, for Buffalo, this is a brutal stretch coming down the last few games of the season, because they right now are the number one wild card in the AFC, and they are in control of it. But they have to make sure they don't slip up. And for Dallas, obviously, they're in a division where you could throw the Giants and Redskins out, and Philadelphia is slipping and sliding. So Dallas almost can split the rest of the way and still win the division. But I just don't have the faith right now to lay the points with Dallas in a game where they're playing somebody that's pretty good defensively.
Dan, I think that Dallas is always going to be popular because they're Dallas, and there's a lot of Dallas fans out there. I'm looking at the offense. Prescott, very affordable on DraftKings. He's got to be the chalk, I would think. But you'll tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Zeke Elliott, they're feeding him last week. You could pick Amari Cooper, I think, because he's playing at home. You can look at their defense, thinking maybe they get Josh Allen to turn it over a couple of times. That night game with New Orleans and Atlanta is going to be the most popular, but I see a lot of good things going on with this Dallas offense, despite the matchup.
Yeah, the Dak price on DraftKings really stands out. He's less than Josh Allen is, which, he's the home quarterback. He's favored by 7, and yet he's got this salary that stands out like a sore thumb here. So I do think a lot of people will play him. I don't know if he's quite going to be the chalk, but, it's going to be split up between him, Breeze, and probably Matt Ryan. But the thing about it is this Buffalo team is a run funnel. They're really good versus the pass, and they struggle versus the run. And that's why we see Amari Cooper here at $6K. Again, lowest salary we've had on him, but you mentioned home road splits. Talk about how dramatic these are. We've got a 29.7 DraftKings points at home this year, 8.4 DraftKings points on the road. Now, sometimes that can be a little bit noisy, but I think there's something to it here. But I think he's a guy that I think is going to garner just a ton of ownership at that price, just because of the name that he garners and coming off the bagel, like, they're going to want to feed him and get him going. So if you're playing a cash game, you're definitely going to play him. I like Elliott best in this game, though. Like I said, run funnel here. Tre'Davious White's a really good corner. He's going to be on Cooper. So in tournaments, if you don't play Cooper, I like Elliott at 7-4. The price is fine. We saw, decent workload for him last week, and it feels like he's ready for a get-right spot. Last week certainly wasn't it against New England in terrible weather, but he did have 2 touchdowns against Detroit. Didn't get great yardage that day, but I think that he's a guy who's going to go over 100 yards here. And the other guy to talk about, too, because tight end is a total disaster on this slate, could be Jason Witten. Now, he doesn't have a huge ceiling, but he's cheap. And I know I made fun of you about 5 weeks ago for talking about Jason Witten on this show, Holden. So you're waiting to give it back to me.
No,
right
I don't
now.
Remember. I seriously don't remember.
Oh,
so
I absolutely blasted you. I think K. Raj probably remembers that one. It was I went in too bad that day. But on a 3-game slate like this, you can't be too picky. And he's one of the few guys who's getting consistent targets here that at that position that you need to roster in your team. So I think he's viable.
Oh my God. 5 weeks ago, you just pummeled me on that. And look how you're coming around now 5 weeks later. I do want to talk about the Buffalo side real quick before we get back to K-Raj. I mean, Josh Allen has been compiling points. He's been on a roll last 3 weeks. He can always, throw the ball deep, and Brown scores a touchdown or 2. So, I mean, if you're going in this game, I think, first of all, you're playing multiple lineups. You're going to have some Josh Allen. But I think you got to bring it back with Brown. I mean, I don't care who's on Brown. This guy is a deep ball away from 10 points on one play.
No question. I think there's a couple of guys we can look at here. And I'm fine with Allen in tournaments. There's no question. I think his ownership's going to be low, and he's going to be the key. And here's the deal, too. Buffalo, they're not getting a whole lot of respect. They obviously see it in the line, and they're never on national TV. I mean, this is a moment for them in front of a national audience to say, hey, we're the real deal. I think they come ready to play. I like them plus the 7 points in this game. But you mentioned John Brown, absolutely. One play away. I think again, another really cheap, sneaky guy for you, especially if you're playing Allen, could be a guy like Isaiah McKenzie, 3.1K on this 3-game slate. He's playing a decent number of snaps out there. And I think that, again, you're going to have to be uncomfortable playing a few guys if you want to play Michael Thomas, you want to play Kamara, you want to play Julio, you want to play these studs. You're going to have to find these 3K crappers. There's another name for you that I think is viable on this slate.
Well, I think especially if Robert Foster's out. Robert Foster had a nice catch this past week, but his hamstring was bothering him. He did head out to practice. Keep an eye on that, because I think if Foster's out, then you got McKenzie. If Foster does play, I think Foster might be a guy that can just pop up and score a touchdown here. K-Raj, 45 is the total. Which way are you leaning?
Probably have to go under, just because of the way Buffalo's defense has been. And like I said before about Dallas, not trusting them against good defenses. Also, another note here, 4th time the Bills are an underdog this year in their first 3 occurrences, 26 points with New England total, 21 against Tennessee, 35 against Cleveland. So there's been a lot of underplays there, pretty much never in doubt in all 3 of those with the Bills in the role of an underdog. And I just can't see where Dallas can still obviously win this game, but if Dallas can win this one 21-16, you're still staying under the total. I just can't see where this can be a high scoring affair.
Hey, Dan, anything with Singletary in that run game over there with the, Frank Gore, give me a break, but Singletary?
Yeah, he 70% of snaps over the last 2 weeks and 21 for 106 on the ground. I'm fine with him. I don't think he's like a core play for me, but I wouldn't X him out of my player pool. Okay. He's yet to kind of break out for like that 2 touchdown, slate breaking performance. I'd be a little bit surprised it would come here, especially as like a 7-point underdog. I'd rather kind of play him when they're the favorite, when they can control the clock. It's possible that happens here, but I don't think it's a likely scenario. So I think there's probably better running back plays than him at the price.
Just want to throw this out here. 3 games all in a dome. I mean, this is ridiculous. No Leon Lett moments. No elements, 3 games in a dome. Come on, NFL. I'd much rather see Buffalo and Dallas in Buffalo. That'd be nice. 8:20 Eastern. New Orleans at Atlanta. This is the big game. NBC. 48 is where it opened with the total. It's sitting at 49. Opened K-Raj, 5.5-point favorites for New Orleans. Now they're 7-point favorites at even money. So this is interesting because Atlanta went in and whooped New Orleans' tushy down in New Orleans. And I have a hard time thinking, especially after watching a lot of that Atlanta game against Tampa Bay, I have a hard time thinking, even though New Orleans is on the road, they're in a dome and they can't cover the 7. I feel like they're just going to go out and wipe out Atlanta.
Yeah, I could see that happening just because, look, going back to that game a few weeks ago, that was a lot of value in the Falcons, getting 14 off the bye. I know the Saints were off the bye too, but we know Atlanta has the capabilities of at least hanging with New Orleans, and they beat them outright. But also in that game, just a note on the Saints that they only allowed about 320 yards of offense to Atlanta. So it wasn't like Atlanta had 500 yards in them either in that game, but the Falcons were in control of it, and they ended up getting the win. And it almost felt like the Tampa Bay game this past Sunday, that was the kerplunk game for the Atlanta Falcons, that after they win at New Orleans, win at Carolina, they're feeling good about themselves. Then they play Tampa Bay, who's been a disaster, and the Bucs run them. So now Atlanta's back in the underdog role, and Atlanta's just not good at home. I don't know what it is. They beat Philadelphia in week 2, but for some reason they have not fared well at home. And I know they had the Seattle game without Matt Ryan earlier in the year. But as far as the Saints go, they held off Carolina this past week. And I just keep going back to this seesaw, at least defensively, for the Saints, that if you go back to week 3 against Seattle, they allowed 27. Then they allowed 10 to Dallas, then 24 to Tampa, 6 to Jacksonville, 25 to Chicago, 9 to Arizona, 26 to Atlanta, 17 to Tampa, 31 to Carolina. So you got to expect this is the one where they rebound and play better. Obviously, New Orleans, they're in control of the South, so they're okay with that. But still, with San Francisco coming up, still an opportunity maybe to get, if not home field, maybe a bye in the first round. They cannot mess around in this game against Atlanta. I think New Orleans will take care of business.
Yeah, I can't remember where I saw it though, but after week 10, you get in the late season divisional games, you're seeing them go under a little bit. So when I come back, I want to talk to you about that. But Dan, the Atlanta side to me is really curious here because Hooper missed practice yesterday. We're sitting here taping this on Tuesday. So you kind of have to figure out a lineup with Hooper and without Hooper. And if it's without Hooper, don't you go back to Russell Gage, at least on DK, 10 targets last week, 8 catches. The team you would think would be down. Maybe they have to go there. And I don't know how much of the game you watch, but Julio Jones is in serious trouble with that shoulder. Normally it's lower body injuries that worry me with a wide receiver. I mean, the guy could not lift his arm. So he's going to have to be drugged up if we're going to see him succeed. Calvin Ridley's got a little deeper ADOT lately. So I think Russell Gage, is he a guy you have to take into account if Hooper does not play?
Probably. I mean, the price came up, but it's 4.5. So like on DraftKings in particular, that's pretty reasonable. So I think he's squarely an option. And just to piggyback on something that you alluded to there before you got into this was, it seems like the second time around the games, usually are lower. Well, it's been proven from a fantasy perspective, the second time that you play an in-division opponent, you almost always, not always, but the trend is lesser fantasy points just because you're more familiar with that situation facing him the second time of the year. So that's something you got to be a little bit careful of. But, even if Michael Thomas doesn't do what he did last week, last time they played 14 for 152 that day and didn't score a touchdown. And I think Kevin made a great case and why I think New Orleans is a smash here is it's not like Atlanta went up and down the field against them. And I think that New Orleans had a little bit of bad luck in that game that I think will probably turn. And they're going to want a little bit of revenge here off of that embarrassing performance at home. So I look for Brees to be a great option. Thomas, Kamara. I mean, the one thing you love about New Orleans right now is they're pretty focused in terms of where they're getting the football. It's to Kamara, it's to Michael Thomas, and it's been to Jared Cook the last couple of weeks. So those are the 3 guys I'm looking at. Kamara, 7 receptions in 4 consecutive games. And again, if Hooper's out, like there is no great tight end. So I think Jared Cook is the guy that I would plug and play because he's been one of the few players at that position with a ceiling. So I definitely like him. The one guy to keep your eye on, too, on Atlanta, it's still early in the week for us here, but if Freeman comes back for Atlanta, he could be viable just because Brian Hill proves that he is not very good. He's been given ample opportunity to be that lead back the last 2.5 weeks, and he's really done nothing with it. So if Freeman is if he's active, I think he's going to get the lion's share of the work. And in a game which they might be trailing, it wouldn't shock me to see him get 6-7 receptions in that pass game on dump offs.
Yeah. So K-Raj, let's get to the the total, and then here's the deal. Week 11 on was actually you've got late season divisional games. The under is the way to go. I think you're just something remarkable, like 63% over the last few years. So that's something I think you got to keep in mind with this game. I don't know. You're the betting insider here. The total's at 49. It opened at 48. So do you see any merit to going with the under here, or are we just looking at the Saints team coming out and laying down a hammer?
I normally like this vice versa. We always keep an eye on with divisional matchups from the standpoint of not necessarily if the first matchup goes under to go over the second time or vice versa, but if the first matchup is just so totally under, like, and maybe this isn't a great example, but Jacksonville, Tennessee, when they played in week 3, and granted, you had different quarterbacks, Mariota and Minshew, that was a low-scoring game. They played again this past Sunday and just sailed over the total. And I get they had a huge third quarter, the Titans, with different quarterbacks in. But maybe you'll see a higher-scoring game after you had a combined 35 points the first time around. Now, that would be one reason why I'd like the over here. They just played a low-scoring game. Maybe you'll see a high-scoring game, and it's a few points lower. Now, on the flip side, though, like I mentioned, with the defense playing better after a not-so-great performance for the Saints, then that would make me want to think about the under. If New Orleans, if they drop 28 and they win this game 28-10, 28-17, then you'd probably go that direction. So I probably want to stick with that one just because of Atlanta not really lighting up New Orleans the first time necessarily. So I would probably say go under here. And also for the Falcons, the 2 games prior to the Tampa Bay game, that they did play really well defensively. And we know Atlanta's not good defensively, but they at least showed some signs there. So I'll probably stick with that one out of the 2. Probably go under, not convincing, but at least one game that can be 28-17, 28-20 and stay under.
You mentioned Kamara there, Dan. I just feel like if I have 10 lineups, I've got to have 80-90% exposure to Michael Thomas at this point. I mean, on either side, he has to be the foundation. I can see at least going Zeke and maybe a Tariq Cohen and figuring out something else in the flex. But at this point, Michael Thomas, outside of Christian McCaffrey, this is as consistent as it gets. Like, he builds your floor and just try and get some other guys to go off. He has to be in your lineup.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like ridiculously priced or anything here for a 3-game slate either. And like we've talked about, there's enough ways to make it happen. I thought they priced the slate actually pretty well. So yeah, he's going to be in it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with playing Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees alongside.
Right?
No. That up. Right. Like, I think we can do that. The question is, and I think the one thing from a strategy side of things is, like, if you're talking about a full slate, usually if you're running 3 guys from a game, you're automatically running something back from the other side because you're thinking, like, this is going to be the high-scoring fantasy game of the day. I'm going to take advantage of it. But the fact of the matter is we only have 3 games here. We might not have a back-and-forth type shootout situation. So don't force a quote-unquote game stack here on 3-game slates. You don't have to do it. When you're looking at the larger slates, it makes a ton of sense to do that because there's a higher likelihood there might be that one spot that does go back and forth. There's a very good chance that New Orleans wins this game 35-14, and you've got tons of fantasy goodness from New Orleans and really nothing there from Atlanta on the other side. So don't force the run back here on these 3-game kind of Thanksgiving slates. You almost got to pick and choose and try and get those touchdowns from those other games. And that's why I like Detroit and Chicago. If this was a 12-game slate, we're probably not playing anybody from that because, we've got so many other people to choose from. But here, if you can figure out who scores that touchdown is going to be low ownership because we're scheduled to have 39 points. There's going to be scores to be had, and then pair them up with these studs. I think that's the path to winning the big field tournaments this week.
All right, guys, I want to remind everybody that if you're watching this on YouTube on our RotoGrinders channel, make sure you like and subscribe. Like and subscribe because wonderful, magical things will happen to you if you do that. Dan, what do you want to plug? Sharpside app, RotoGrinders. We got a lot going on here with Thanksgiving coming up.
Yeah, on Sunday, we actually are doing another free roll over on Yahoo, and I think that we're going to have free access to our lineup builder over there on Yahoo for this weekend. So be on the lookout for that. Huge week for college football as well. You've got an incredible Friday slate and then a Saturday slate. And then next week, of course, is the championship. So if you want to be a subscriber, we've got weekly options for you. So if you're looking for playing some daily fantasy college football, that's what I like doing this weekend. So check that out.
Wish I could. Stuck in Colorado. Can't do it. Wish I could. Hey, K-Raj, NFL college football going on right now. I just have a question for you, like a Vegas insider. How much time can you spend on the NBA, college basketball, and the NHL when you got so much football going on?
Honestly, I find the time, and I've done well in NBA and college, and hockey's been a little bit slow for me. But college is a tough one because you have a lot of these tournaments going on the next few weeks, especially this week, just so many of them. And that's a little bit difficult. NBA is easier to follow just because you only have 30 teams. But college basketball, if you could find a way to get through the next few weeks and stay above water before conference season, you should be okay. But admittedly, it is not easy with the college basketball, but we still find a way to do it all.
Yep. Check out Kevin's stuff, VegasInsider.com. You can buy his picks. You can listen to his what's the name of the podcast?
Bet and Collect.
That's right. Bet and Collect. So you can do one of them. And then if you don't collect, it's really not worth it, is it? All right, guys, I'm going to go enjoy 15 inches of snow here in Denver. I'm sure it's nice out there in Jacksonville and in South Florida, too. By the way, Dan, my parents just flew up from St. Augustine Island. So this is a little different than what's going on down there right now in Florida. And I'm sure, you're eating your boobies down there, just cleaning up in 80-degree weather, guys.
Yeah.
Hey, I hope there's a way that you guys can enjoy the Thanksgiving slate as much as I can, because this is, again, my third favorite sports day of the year behind the first 2 days of the NCAA tournament. Dan, have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
You too.
I don't know what you're doing. You're probably eating turkey, hanging out with family. K-Raj, again, not sure what you're doing. Probably doing the same thing as all of us. Enjoy it. Thanks to Devin back in the studio. He said I needed to pump this 3 times. So just like and subscribe on the YouTube channel, and we're all good. Bye, guys. Enjoy Thanksgiving. We'll catch you next week.
See you.